Over the last 165 years, roughly 200 million people have traveled to the site at Lourdes. Yet out of that massive data set, the official count of recognized cures sits at exactly 72. You cannot evaluate a disparity that large through devotional faith or reflexive skepticism. Both approaches encode the conclusion before examining the evidence. The origin point of these claims is a highly charged communal environment. Tens of thousands of people gather with an acute expectation of healing. Before we open a single medical file, we need strict rules of engagement. We will assess these cases using a three-tiered framework: a historical baseline, modern institutional medical gauntlets, and an objective statistical engine. Without defining this analytical framework right now, any probability assignment we make later in the series will be meaningless noise. The baseline for evaluating anomalous claims traces back to 1734 and the writings of Cardinal Prospero Lambertini. Lambertini served as the promotor fide, the devil's advocate. His specific job was to restrict the recognition of miracles, finding every possible flaw in a claim. The checklist governing modern medical review requires a grave prognosis, objective lesional evidence, and no curative treatment. The recovery must be sudden, instantaneous, and complete. Partial remission doesn't count. Finally, durable permanence requires years or decades of follow-up observation. Lambertini also instituted an explicit and scientifically prescient rule: the strict exclusion of nervous, functional, or psychiatric disorders. This exclusion acknowledges a physiological reality. Pilgrimage settings act as massive placebos, capable of reversing psychosomatic illnesses. The Church categorizes these psychological reversals as expected natural events, not supernatural interventions. Building directly upon that strict historical baseline, the modern procedural architecture divides the investigation into two distinct stages. Stage 1 is the Medical Bureau, receiving dozens of claims annually. Only the top 3 to 5 most rigorous files advance to the International Medical Committee. This panel of 20 to 30 secular specialists requires a strict 2/3 voting majority to clear a case. They face a firm jurisdictional limit. The Medical Committee possesses no authority to declare a miracle. They can only vote on whether a case is medically unexplained. If a file clears the medical panel, it moves to Stage 2, the ecclesiastical filter. This creates a deliberate geographic firewall. The dossier is transferred away from Lourdes to the bishop of the patient's home diocese. The bishop, with reputational stakes in the site, does not rule on the cures. This geographic and professional separation introduces structural conflict of interest checks. Passing the Lourdes filter requires clearing higher evidentiary bars than standard academic peer review. To see if this filter actually works, we can trace the Church's own epistemic humility through the empirical timeline of declarations. This timeline plots the approved cures, starting with 7 local declarations in 1862. Then comes a massive spike of 33 cures retroactively declared between 1907 and 1913. Following that spike, the data shows absolute canonical silence from 1913 to 1946, 0 cases. The devastating impact of 2 world wars completely dismantled the European institutional investigation machinery during that chaotic period. After the wars, declarations resumed. Between 1946 and 1965, the Church approved 22 cures. Then we hit the second major anomaly. For 30 years, between 1976 and 2006, 0 cures were declared. The rise of modern diagnostic standards and advanced imaging technology eliminated the evidentiary ambiguity that earlier eras relied upon. By 2008, the former bureau secretary candidly admitted that the panel was, in his words, no longer in the miracle business. If Lourdes functioned purely as a confirmation bias machine, declarations would be continuous. The phenomenon's collapse under modern scrutiny proves the filter yields to scientific advancement. The final tool we need is an external mechanism to evaluate the individual medical files that survive the modern filter, a Bayesian analytical engine. This visual represents our primary rule of engagement. Every case begins with a genuine 50-50 prior probability. We reject the assumption that a supernatural cause has a 0% chance. Assigning a near-zero prior before examining the evidence encodes a metaphysical conclusion as a starting premise. Instead, our engine tests three variables. First, the base rate of natural resolution. Second, the likelihood ratio comparing the cure against natural healing timelines. Third, independent evidentiary constraints, like biopsies, MRI scans, and hostile observer reports that restrict alternative explanations. The alternate probability verdict emerges strictly from triangulating these three data points. By forcing both skeptical materialists and credulous believers to start at a 50-50 baseline, we ensure that the data alone drives the slider. We now have our fully unified methodology. This structural lens allows us to separate statistical noise and psychosomatic remission from genuinely inexplicable anomalies. In the next episode, we will deploy this engine against the foundational 19th century case files. We will examine the strongest tubercular cures of the 1890s and the famous atheist novelist who actively tried to suppress them. The rules are set.